It's a feud that really developed over panties and boobs. This is the Greg Rucka versus Frank Cho feud. Hey everybody, this is Perch. This is kind of an odd little feud. It feels like one that probably has a little bit more meat to it, and it's a showdown that, unlike very much likely is going to have some additional pieces to it in the future. I don't feel like this one's going to go away. But back in the age-old year of 2016, Frank Cho, who's known for doing a lot of different types of art. In particular, Liberty Meadows is kind of where he got to some prominence. And then more than that, he draws very pretty looking women. I think that's, he's a good artist. It's unfair. I think the way a lot of people have described Frank Cho is that he's a cheesecake artist. But the reality is Cho can draw backgrounds, he can draw all kinds of different things. And I think people like the Mary Sue and others have basically labeled him as a guy who draws boobs, and that's pretty much it. And I think that's quite unfair. Anyway, he gets hired to draw basically variant covers for DC, and in particular Wonder Woman. And on the surface of your DC, this makes complete sense. You've got Wonder Woman, a very core character. You've got a guy who draws very attractive looking women. Let's put the two together with variant covers, and here we go. So at the time, Greg Rucka, who's currently writing Lois Lane, more of a political spin. In the more recent issue, she's kind of interacting with ICE and evil border patrol. Greg Rucka's certainly the author of Lazarus, has done a number of different comics in the past. Definitely has his political leanings on his sleeve, and as time has gone on, and really through the last, say, 3 years, I'm not sure what happened over the last 3 years, those political leanings have made their way more into comics, and more of his work has taken that bend to it. So Greg Rucka, who's a Portland-based writer, is writing Wonder Woman back in 2016, and Frank Cho is doing the variant covers. So Cho is known for being a bit of a jokester, I would say, online. He had stumbled across some gold when he was in a feud over Spider-Gwen, where he drew the character. The Spider-Gwen was basically, there's an artist on Spider-Gwen called Robbie Rodriguez. And Robbie Rodriguez, Frank Cho basically did some covers of Spider-Gwen, and she's, busty and curvy, because that's what Frank Cho draws. And Rodriguez gets angry about it. Scolds any kind of artist sexualizing his character, as he puts it. And Cho decides to make fun of that by starting a series of covers called Outrage, where you draw the character doing something, or maybe the boobs are falling out of the costume, or just some kind of hijinks are going on. And then it says Outrage, as kind of making fun of Rodriguez's really over-the-top kind of anger. And he starts selling these things as variant covers at a pretty high markup. So he's created a little business for himself. So this all culminates in Frank Cho kind of poking at Robbie Rodriguez by sending him a basket, or saying he's going to send him a basket with like grammar for dummies and how to draw and some other things. It's certainly rude. Robbie Rodriguez, I'll say Robbie Rodriguez 5 times. Robbie Rodriguez responded saying, he should send. Frank Cho basically owes him his career, which is a pretty dick move to say, all things considered, based on where careers went. And certainly Robbie Rodriguez would go on to, use the idea of sending people things that they don't want in the mail to pretty amazing lengths later on. But that's another feud for another time. Anyway, so Cho, it's important to note that piece, because I do believe it plays into anything, to all of this, because Rodriguez at least had some connection into many of the people in the Portland area, including Rucka. So Cho is busy drawing away Wonder Woman, and Rucka decides to start. Well, and here's where we don't know the truth. So this is where I'm laying out kind of what both people say. According to Cho, Greg Rucka was continuously kind of altering and censoring the artwork, basically saying that the costumes had to be drawn differently, and took a piece of art that Cho had done and cropped it so that the butt was not shown as much in the cover of Wonder Woman, and just kind of really censoring what Cho had done. Now, whether this was Rucka who did it or not, because neither DC nor Rucka commented on it, somebody was certainly doing it. But there are two peculiar facts in this whole feud that really leaves people scratching their head. Number one is that these were variant covers, so these weren't even the standard covers. So it's a little bit confusing why we would go to that much trouble for a variant cover. Number two, inside the comic book, there were panels and scenes of Wonder Woman, not just in states of undress, but completely undressed in pools, naked, just everything out, covered by hair and branches and other bits. But regardless of all that, the covers are getting censored kind of continuously. Cho eventually basically opts out and then claims he was hired to do 24 covers, or since this was a bi-weekly book for Rebirth, he went 6 covers and then kind of opted out. Now, whether this was pressure from Rucka saying, I'm going to continue to do, to look into you, or whether it was Cho who asked to be moved to somewhere else, it's hard to say. Cho would go sideways and start doing Harley Quinn, and continue to make money, and then continued also to do those Outrage covers and poke fun at Rucka kind of any chance he got. Rucka never made a statement on the matter, but others made it on his behalf, including Gail Simone, who weighs in and says, hey, she's good friends with Rucka. She doesn't know the artist. And she kind of says, a lot of artists get upset who feel censored, but this is all normal. This is part of the business. Comics go past a lot of eyes before approval. A-list writers are routinely asked for input on the covers, and a misstep between how a book is meant to be portrayed and the artist's freedom is common. Beyond that, the writer has not spoken up, and DC will not speak up. They don't talk about behind-the-scenes stuff. The statement came as a little bit of a defense to Rucka, who is starting to get beaten up pretty bad, I would say, by a number of people inside the comics community for basically censoring something. And I think it was the hypocrisy of it. It was not just, this wasn't like a Monera situation where, the cover was pretty much all but. It was pretty minor, and in terms of what Cho often does in other things, pretty restrained, you could argue. But so Rucka was starting to get, I think, some pretty negative feedback, and Rucka was not commenting, but a number of people kind of in his network and his circle started to. And this is why I mentioned the thing with Rodriguez earlier, because it did feel like that played a role in it, in that feud that kind of went on, and Rodriguez looked pretty foolish for kind of claiming it was his character, Spider-Gwen. Marvel, who never made a statement, you could hear them somewhere in the background going, excuse me, it's our character. It has nothing to do, you were the artist and you were replaceable, and he was replaced. And so, as Rodriguez would go sideways into working with Zoe Quinn and doing that work, and sending pictures of his butt to other people, Rucka, of course, would go to finish his Wonder Woman run, off to do Lois Lane and so on. Frank Cho started his own book and kind of never really went anywhere serious. And then Cho started to claim that he was in negotiations with DC over taking over Wonder Woman. And he, in his statements, was saying things like, I don't like origin stories, which was seen as a bit of a shot since Rucka was writing an origin story at the time. But then as kind of word began to pick up and Cho began to get, I'd say, some press and some coverage over this idea that he was going to be writing Wonder Woman, DC comes out and says there are no plans for a Wonder Woman Frank Cho project at all, nothing. And kind of the official statement is they were not talking or working with him at all. Cho was saying that not only were they in negotiation, that, quote, let's be honest, it's definitely going to happen. I know I have a huge fan base and the story's already been written. So who knows what the truth is there. It's hard to tell whether it's kind of sour grapes or Cho poking at Rucka from a distance, or who knows. But where are they all today? Well, Cho continues to do variant covers and get some work done. He's got a good living for himself drawing kind of these cheesecake, but not quite cheesecake imagery. But again, I think, to be fair to Cho, there's a lot to his work. I think calling it just cheesecake is missing out on some things. Certainly the Mary Sue has labeled him kind of sexist cheesecake artist of doom. Cho has gone on to kind of support people like Mark Waid and others in kind of his lawsuit. So it's he's kind of all over the place. Some have tried to claim he's part of the revolution. Cho has firmly said he is not. Rodriguez, of course, is kind of completely sideways at this point, and Rucka is writing the modestly popular kind of Lois Lane book in Brian Michael Bendis' Superman family. So, where does this all sit today? That's where it sits. That's who everybody's doing. That's what everybody's doing. It seems clear that Cho, there's no love lost there between himself and Rucka. And like I said, it feels like there's a couple other chapters that are going to get written. This feud does not feel like it's over. It just feels like it's in a holding pattern, if you will. And I think if Cho wants to reignite things, all it takes is doing a couple more Outrage covers with Lois Lane on it to really get this ball rolling again. And given Cho's kind of desire to joke around and poke at people, feels like it's only a matter of time. Anyway, there you go. There's the Greg Rucka Frank Cho feud, a feud over boobs. For boobs, apparently. So do you have any comments or questions on this? There was a bunch of other little shots fired throughout this thing. Bleeding Cool certainly did their absolute best to keep this thing rolling with what had to be like 500 articles about Frank Cho and everything he did and kind of poking. Bleeding Cool, of course, who gets a lot of their sources from people within the Portland network. Undoubtedly, Rucka is probably not a part of that. He's not known for speaking in those kinds of forums, but certainly friends of Rucka's, close friends of Rucka's are and do contribute to Bleeding Cool, either directly or anonymously. And Frank Cho also has a reputation there as well. So it's a perfect Bleeding Cool kind of feud that they could get going. But if I missed some pieces, and I'm sure I have, there are always lots of pieces in all these things, let me know in the comments below. Fill this out. Are you with me? Do you think there's more to this, or is this feud done and done? Let me know. Otherwise, like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications if you'd like to be bothered. Follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch, and thanks for listening.